What's going on, duelists? It's your boy Nick, bringing you on the channel for the very first time my Dinomorphia deck profile. Now, this is a deck that I've been working on with a close friend of mine for a bit now, and this is intended to be a more budget version of Dinomorphia for the post-Cyberstorm Access set that just released. For those of you new to the channel, welcome. My name is Nick. We do Yu-Gi-Oh! Content mainly focused around Rogue and casual decks alike. I do tons of different content ranging from deck profiles to live duel videos, combo tutorials, test hands. If those are things that you're interested in, then I highly encourage that you smash that subscribe button, like the video, and check out some of my other offerings that I have on my channel, because I have covered quite a few different decks in the past, and there's bound to be something to catch your eye. I also want to thank all of you who have helped me get to 840 subscribers. Thank you all so much for your support and dedication to, viewing all my content and just helping this channel grow, because ultimately that's really all I want. I thoroughly enjoy talking about Yu-Gi-Oh! And doing everything Yu-Gi-Oh! Related. Something that I'm really passionate about, and I'm so glad to be able to share that experience with all you guys. So thank you all so much. Let's continue helping the channel grow so we can hit that 1,000 subscriber benchmark. I cannot get there without your help. And I think that covers the intro. So like I said, this is my Dinomorphia profile for post-Cyberstorm Access. And like I said, this is intended to be a more budget alternative of the deck with a few little spicy tech choices thrown in. So it's a clean 40-card list. So we're not going to waste any more time. We're going to dive right into the monsters. Triple copies of Dinomorphia Theresia, pretty much a mainstay in any Dinomorphia build. She is your only starter, well, not your only starter, but the best starter in my opinion. Upon normal or special summon, she allows you to set a Dinomorphia trap directly from the deck to your spell trap zone. Then if your life points are 2,000 or less, she gains 500 attack. So Dinomorphia have this gimmick where they try and get your life points as low as they possibly can. And the payoff for that is basically a really cool boss monster that they have in the extra deck called Dinomorphia Rexterm. But we'll dive more into that once we get to the extra deck. But so you play triple copies of Theresia. Also, if this card is destroyed by battle or card effect, you can banish any trap from your graveyard as cost, and then special summon a level 4 or lower Dinomorphia monster from the graveyard, except a copy of herself. So just overall a very strong card, so you max out on her obviously because she is very important for the theme. Then we play the second main deck monster that they have, and that's triple copies of Dinomorphia Diplos. Now, upon normal or special summon, he lets you send a Dinomorphia card from your deck to the graveyard. Then if your life points are 2,000 or less, you burn your opponent for 500 damage. Now, he's not as great as Theresia. Like, ideally, you'd rather open with her than open with him. But there are still some situations where Diplos is a better normal summon for the theme. But for the most part, you usually want to be summoning Theresia just because she's far better, in my opinion. And then he has the exact same float effect that Theresia has. If this card is destroyed by battle or card effect, banish any trap from your graveyard as cost, then target a level 4 or lower Dinomorphia monster from grave except himself, special summon it. So if Diplos gets destroyed, he can float into Theresia, and if Theresia gets destroyed, she can float into Diplos. So overall, those are the only two main deck cards that the deck has. And like I said, between the two, Theresia is obviously the better one, but you still need to max out on Diplos because you do use them to fuse into your Dinomorphia fusions. And if the duel becomes a grind, you kind of want to have, 3 of both, since those are the only main deck Dinomorphia monsters currently that the game has to offer. Moving on though, we're on triple copies of Ash Blossom and Joyous Spring as the hand trap of choice here. Again, while you're watching this, be mindful that this is a budget version of the deck. So obviously the ashes, if you bought the trap trick structure, you got to place that right there, assuming you bought 3, obviously. So you run 3 copies of Ash. Ash is just that catch-all hand trap. It doesn't matter what deck you're going up against. Every deck in the format, almost every deck in general, can be Ash to some capacity. So it's just a very well-rounded hand trap, in my opinion. So you max out on that. And believe it or not, that's it for the monsters. Just 9 main deck monsters, 3 of which are a hand trap. So we're moving on to the spells now, and we are playing triple copies of Pot of Duality. Again, be mindful that this is a budget version of the deck. So, I mean, while it might make more sense to run cards like Prosperity, again, I built this deck with budget in mind, and to be quite honest, between the main and extra deck alone, we probably spent around 80, 90 bucks max. Like it's well under $100 for this deck. So again, if you're looking to get into Yu-Gi-Oh and you like dinosaurs, or you're just a fan of, have that 90s Jurassic Park type nostalgia, then this deck is definitely up your alley. But 3 copies of Pot of Duality. Old card, but a classic nonetheless. You excavate the top 3 cards of your deck, add one of them to your hand. Also, after that, shuffle the rest back into the deck. For the rest of the turn, you cannot special summon during... I'm sorry, not for the rest of the turn, but during the turn that this card's activated, you cannot special summon, which sounds like a problem, but it's not, because Dinomorphia does most of their special summoning on the opponent's turn anyway with their traps. On your turn, all you really care about is normal summoning Diplos or Theresia, setting back, or unpassing. So the duality restriction does not hinder you whatsoever. Then we're playing 2 copies of Trap Tantalizing Tune. Again, this is out of the Trap Trick structure. This card is interesting because it allows you to discard a normal trap to then draw 2 cards, assuming it resolves. But that's actually not my favorite part about this. Dinomorphia has this thing where they like to banish their traps, not only with their own monster effects, but because the trap cards have their own effects that allow you to banish them from grave. And Trap Tantalizing Tune allows you to take a banished normal trap and place it back on the bottom of the deck. So it helps you recycle a lot of your banished normal traps, which I thought was kind of cool. So we're running this card as a 2 of in the build, and so far it's been working out pretty great. Then moving on, we are on 2 copies of Forbidden Droplet. This is probably the most expensive card in the main deck, and the only reason why we're running this is because, again, the friend that I helped build this for, he bought last year's Mega Tins and ended up pulling 2 copies of Droplet out of said tins. So that's why we run the Droplets. But again, if you really want to be budget conscious, you don't need to run this. You could pretty much replace this with literally any card you want. It could just be any 2 trap cards of your choice, or 2 more hand traps. Whatever you like, but this card does have some interesting applications in this deck, whereas like if you're going into an established board, when you activate like your Dinomorphia, Frenzy, or Domain, 2 of their more powerful traps, and your opponent responds with like a monster negate, you can actually send that face-up trap that you activated for cost for the droplet, negate that monster, and then at least your trap, like you kind of get like a free activation of Droplet in that case, because you just send the card that would already have gone to the grave for its cost. So I thought that was kind of a cool interaction. So we're just on the 2 Droplet in the main board. And then to round out the spells, 1 Call by the Grave, because again, we are going into a hand trap heavy format, so you're going to need ways to stop those hand traps. And that rounds out the spells. Now the rest of the deck is just purple cards, traps, because that's what we like here. So we're on triple copies of Dinomorphia Domain. Now Dinomorphias, they're actually a fusion archetype, and they don't fuse with spells like most fusion decks do. They fuse with these normal trap cards. So Dinomorphia Domain states that during the main phase, you pay half your life points. Before I read any further, I do want to mention that every Dinomorphia trap has that as a cost to pay half your life. Every trap. So you're going to be paying half for basically every card, every trap you activate in this deck. And while that seems bad at initial glance, trust me, it works out once we get to the extra deck. But so you're going to pay half your life points for cost, and then you fusion summon a Dinomorphia fusion monster from your extra deck using monsters from your hand, deck, or field as material. So it's basically just your typical fusion spell, or fusion trap in this case, but it can only be used during the main phase. And then every Dinomorphia normal trap has the exact same graveyard effect, and that effect reads as follows. When your opponent activates a card or effect while your life points are 2,000 or less, you can banish this card from your graveyard. You take no effect damage from your opponent's card effects this turn. So all the normal traps basically prevent you from taking burn damage by your opponent's card effects for the entire turn, which is pretty cool. So we max out on Domain, obviously, because it's a very important trap to get your fusions out, and then we follow that up with triple copies of Dinomorphia Frenzy, which is their other trap card that they play that lets them fuse. Now, unlike Domain, this one, again, same cost, pay half your life points, and it's only during your opponent's main phase. I just want to point that out because I have seen some people pilot this deck where they misplay that and they do Frenzy on their turn. You actually cannot do that. It has to be during the opponent's main phase specifically, but you pay half your life, you fusion summon a Dinomorphia monster from your extra deck using only 1 monster from your deck and 1 monster from your extra deck as fusion material. So whereas Domain lets you fuse from hand, field, or deck, Frenzy lets you fuse only 1 from deck and 1 from extra deck specifically. And then, again, all the Dinomorphia normal traps have the same graveyard effect where they can banish themselves if your life is 2,000 or less. and you do not take effect damage for the entirety of that turn. So we max out on 3 Domain, 3 Frenzy. Those are your ways to get to your fusions, or your only ways to get to your fusions. So they're very, very important. And then to round out the rest of the Dinomorphia normal traps, we're on 2 copies of Dinomorphia Brute. Pay half your life, you destroy a Dinomorphia you control, and 1 card your opponent controls. This is non-targeting destruction, so very good removal in my opinion. Play it as a 2 of, again, same graveyard effect as the previous 2 traps since it is a normal one. You just banish it to mitigate taking effect damage for the turn, but it is very nice to have as a 2 of in my opinion, just because, you know, having spot removal in a deck like this is nice. Then to round out the last normal trap is 1 Dinomorphia Alert. You pay half your life and you special summon up to 2 Dinomorphia monsters from your grave whose total levels equal 8 or less, but you cannot declare an attack with them this turn. Also, you're locked into special summoning except for Dinomorphia monsters. But again, that's not really a problem for this deck most of the time. But think of this as an in-archetype monster reborn of sorts, which is very, very good. Now moving on to the Dinomorphia counter traps, of which there was a new one released in Cyberstorm Access, and we are maxing out on it. It is Dinomorphia Intact. So all the Dinomorphia counter traps, so whereas the normal traps, you could banish them from grave and prevent yourself from taking effect damage for the turn, the counter traps, you can banish them during damage calculation, and while your life points are 2,000 or less, you do not take battle damage from that specific battle, which is pretty cool. So it's nice that, like, even though you get your life points to such low numbers, you don't just outright lose to like a silly burn card, or your opponent like beating over one of your smaller Dinomorphia monsters and you taking, like, you know, battle damage on that exchange. But anyway, so Intact, the reason why we max out on this is because when a monster effect is activated while you control a Dinomorphia card, you pay half your life, negate the activation, and if you do, destroy that monster. Also, whenever you take battle damage this turn, the damage taken becomes half your life points at that time you would take it. So this card is insane because it fixes one of the glaring issues with this deck, and it's the fact that both of your fusion traps, or the traps that let you get into your big boss monsters, can both be hit by Ash Blossom. This card specifically prevents that. Because if you flip up Domain or Frenzy and they chain Ash, you can chain this as Chain Link 3, because you, at that point, control a face-up Dinomorphia card. So then the Ash gets negated and your effect goes through, and meanwhile you've halved your life points twice. And again, we'll talk about why you're doing that once we get to the extra deck, but Intact is a very powerful card, and again, if you don't want to use it to hit Ash, it's just basically like a solemn strike of sorts, you know, just being able to negate any monster effect activated anywhere, whether it's hand, graveyard, banish zone. It's very, very important. So moving on, we were playing 2 copies of Dinomorphia Sonic, another counter trap for the theme. When your opponent activates a spell trap card, while you control a Dinomorphia monster, pay half your life, negate the activation. If you do destroy that card, then you can destroy a Dinomorphia monster you control. So that's also pretty cool, just giving them, like, you know, more spell trap negation, ways to beat cards like evenly matched, which are very popular in this format as well. And then again, same graveyard effect as Intact, because all the counter traps that are Dinomorphia specific can banish themselves if your life is 2,000 or less, and you do not take battle damage for that particular battle when you banish them, which is pretty cool. And that rounds out the Dinomorphia traps. Now, the rest of the traps are just utility cards. We max out on triple copies of Ferret Flames. I think this card should be a mandatory 3 of in any Dinomorphia list you put together. This card is really, really powerful. It's not once per turn, and it states that if the combined attack of all face-up monsters your opponent controls is higher than your life points. Keep in mind, this deck is designed to get its life points to as low as humanly possible. So most of the time that you're dueling, your opponent will have monsters their attack will exceed your life, pretty much 100% of the time. You make your opponent shuffle face-up monsters they control into the deck, their choice, except monsters with 0 attack, so that the combined attack of the remaining monsters they control is less than or equal to what my life points are. So let me give an example. If my life points are at 200, and my opponent controls 3 Blue Eyes White Dragons, each of which is, you know, 3k apiece, if I activate Ferret Flames, the player, again, this card does not interact with the monsters, it forces the player to make the action, kind of like how Evenly Matched does. I forced my opponent to make it so that they shuffle monsters they control back into the deck, so that way any monster that they have remaining, their attack has to be less than what my life is. So if my life is 200 and they have 3 Blue Eyes White Dragons on field, well, they can't leave any monster on board because even if they left one Blue Eyes, the attack of that card would still exceed my life. So it forces them to shuffle their entire monster lineup back into the deck, which is crazy. So this even gets around unaffected monsters. This card is nuts, and the fact that it's not once per turn is just a cherry on top. So we max out on a playset of that. Then we are on a really cool tech card out of Maze of Memories, 2 copies of Soul of the Supreme King. This card is pretty much made for this deck. It requires you to pay half your life points as a cost, which this deck already enjoys doing, and you get to special summon a Supreme King Zark from your extra deck, ignoring its summoning conditions. Now we'll get to what Zark is in a bit, but negate its effects. Now I know as of yesterday, Zark just got new support announced, which is kind of ironic, so I believe Zark did go up in price, unfortunately, but this card allows you to kind of cheat it out. Again, it's negated, but it doesn't matter. It's a 4,000 beat stick just for free. And what's cool about this is if your opponent activates a spell card or spell effect while I control that Zark, something I forgot to mention is that the Zark that you summon off this trap goes back to your extra deck at the end of the next turn. So during that time, if the opponent activates a spell or spell effect, we can banish the Zark we control and this trap from grave to special summon up to one each of a Pendulum Dragon, Xyz Dragon, Synchro Dragon, and Fusion Dragon monsters from the hand, deck, extra deck, and or graveyard. We're only running one specific target for that in the extra, but again, we'll get to that once we talk about the extra deck. But for now, just 2 copies of Soul of the Supreme King. Very good tech card to run in Dinomorphia, in my opinion. And then we round out the last normal trap with a single copy of Trap Tracks, brand new out of Cyberstorm Access. Pretty much like Trap Trick. Trap Track states that you target a monster you control, destroy it, and if you do, you set a normal trap directly from your deck, except a copy of itself. It can be activated this turn. However, you can only activate 1 trap card for the rest of this turn after Trap Tracks resolves. So I like this because it lets you pop a monster you control to set any normal trap from deck to field, which could be Ferret Flames, for example. But because you pop a monster you control specifically, all the Dinomorphias have floating effects. So like you outing your own monster doesn't even hinder you because in fact it ends up benefiting you in most cases. Because like if you pop one of your monsters, you could potentially go into Theresia. Theresia sets into the trap, and it just adds more layers of interaction that your opponent has to like play through effectively. So we're testing this as a one-of right now. It's been working great in my opinion. And then rounding out the main deck, again, this is a 40 card main. We are playing triple copies of Solemn Judgment in the main board. Again, pretty much a staple 3 of in any Dinomorphia list. It's basically just you have your life, negate the activation of any spell, trap, or summon of a monster. Which is very, very powerful. So that rounds out the main deck, guys. Again, 40 cards. Keep in mind, this is a budget out version of the deck. So now we're going to go into the extra deck, where we play triple copies of Dinomorphia Rextrum, aka Mechagodzilla. And this is pretty much the big payoff for this deck. Now, I know a lot of people always get annoyed when Konami likes to throw, give it, decks just floodgates because of it. But in my opinion, I think Dinomorphia is the only deck where the floodgate makes sense, because you pay so much of your life, you kind of need a really big payoff for doing so, and Rextrum is exactly that. It's a level 8 dinosaur fusion monster with 3,000 attack and 0 defense, requiring a Dinomorphia fusion monster plus 1 Dinomorphia monster as material. And it says your opponent cannot activate the effects of monsters they control that have attack greater than or equal to my life. So think of this card as a giant walking skill drain of sorts. We get our life points to such a low threshold that anything the opponent controls whose attack is equal to or greater than our life simply cannot activate its effects. Very crazy floodgate. And if that wasn't crazy enough, Rextrum has a quick effect where he can pay half of our life to make the attack of all monsters the opponent currently controls equal to what our life points are. And because that's a effect that modifies stats, it can be used during the damage calculation, which is very insane. Also, not to mention, if this card is destroyed by battle or by card effect, you can target a level 6 or lower Dinomorphia in the graveyard and special summon it. So again, it floats into some of your smaller dinos, which is very cool. So we max out on Rextrum. Then we play triple copies of Kentragina, who is the second best Dinomorphia in my opinion. She's a level 6 dinosaur fusion effect monster, 4,000 attack, 0 defense. However, this card has a continuous effect that states she loses attack equal to our life. So the lower our life points are, the more attack she actually has, which is kind of interesting. What she does is during the main phase quick effect, she can pay off our life points, banish a Dinomorphia normal trap from our graveyard, and her effect becomes that trap's effect at activation, which is very, very cool. So she can take effects like Domain and Frenzy and copy them to let us fuse again, while also having our life in the process. In addition to that, if she's destroyed by battle or card effect, she allows us to special summon a level 4 or lower Dinomorphia from our graveyard. So we max out on Kentragina. And then for the last Dinomorphia fusion is 2 copies of Stealth Bergia. We don't really summon this that often, but when we do, its effect is kind of interesting. While our life points are 2,000 or less, we do not have to pay life to activate the effects of trap cards, which I thought was really cool. And in addition to that, when the opponent activates a monster effect, quick effect, we can inflict damage to them equal to the attack of that monster. So sometimes we go into Stealth Bergia when the opponent's life points are at a very low threshold, and it forces them to not play, because if they activate an effect, they could potentially burn themselves for game, which is kind of cool. So Stealth Bergia is pretty annoying in some cases, but we just play it as a 2 of. Then rounding out the rest of the extra deck, for the Soul of the Supreme King trap, we're on 2 copies of Zark. Now again, the Supreme King trap summons the Zark and its effects are negated, and it gets shuffled back to the extra deck at the end of the next turn. However, if the Zark does get destroyed, it ends up going to the Pendulum Zone, where its Pendulum Scale effect does actually apply. And that effect is pretty insane. It states that Fusion, Synchro, and Xyz monsters the opponent controls cannot activate their effects, and then once per turn when the opponent adds a card from their deck to their hand, except during the draw phase or the damage step, we get to destroy that card. So yeah, so that's Zark, and then again, he's just a 4K vanilla, assuming you're summoning it off the trap, obviously, so we're not really going to dive into his monster effects all that much. But now the card that the trap card can summon is actually, we play 2 copies of Crystal Clearwing Synchro Dragon. So while we control the Zark, if they activate a spell or spell effect, we banish the Soul of the Supreme King trap from our grave and the Zark we control, and we get to special summon this bad boy for free. And it's a spell trap negate. It can become unaffected by monster effects at quick effect speed and gain attack equal to those monsters, and it's just a house. Also, it is a soft once per turn on the negate, so if you manage to get 2 of these out, because you had like your 2 copies of Soul of the Supreme King, for example, each one can negate a spell trap, which is really, really powerful. So we play 2 copies of that. And then to round out the rest of the extra deck is just 1 Lagia, 1 Dolka for our rank 4 targets, and then we play 1 Tornado Dragon, again, just to out pesky back row on Floodgates if we do come across them. And that rounds out the extra deck, guys. We'll dive into the sideboard very quickly, but again, the sideboard is up to personal preference. Again, I built this deck with budget in mind. However, the first card we're playing in the side is not that budget. We're only running it because my friend that I helped build this for already had a playset of these. But in the side, we are running triple copies of Raw Sphere Mode. This is just to address those build-a-board, combo decks like Super Heavy Samurai when we're going second. They usually end on like a Baron, an Apple, a Savage Dragon, a Therion Regulus, for example. We're just going to give them, the Ball of Death and kind of, set a bunch of back row and watch them try and rebuild through our Floodgates. I know this card is a bit pricey. For budget alternatives, you could run cards like Lava Golem. You could also run something like Kaijus if you don't really have the funds for the Sphere Mode, because I know Sphere Mode has been getting expensive lately. But again, the side deck is up to personal preference. We do play 1 Pankratops, again, just for going second. And then we play triple copies of Cyclone, followed by the 1 Duster. I actually like Cyclone in the sideboard simply because it pays 1,000 life for cost, and any card that lets us reduce our life points is beneficial to us. So the fact that it lets us pay life and gets rid of back rows is just a plus. And then obviously the 1 Duster is pretty self-explanatory. Then for going second, again, we have triple copies of Evenly Matched. We just want to be able to break our opponent's board going second. And then we also have triple copies of Anti-Spell Fragrance in the side, followed by 1 copy of Dinomorphia Reversion to round out the sideboard. So like I said, that is my 40-card budget Dinomorphia deck list. If you guys like this video, or if you like Dinomorphia, like the video, comment down below on what you guys thought, and subscribe if you're watching this and you haven't done so yet. Please, please, please subscribe. Like I said, I'm working my way to 1,000 subs, and I cannot get there without your help. And stay tuned. I'm going to be having a lot more content coming to the channel. Post Cyberstorm Access, I have some more deck profiles on the way. I'll be doing more test hands, combo tutorials, as well as more live duel videos, so you don't want to miss out on that stuff. But with that being said, guys, thank you all so much for your support and your time, and this is Nick, signing out.